You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. And now your footwear insiders, Matt Priest and Andy Polk.
Welcome back to the world's #1 shoe podcast, Shoe and Show. I'm Matt Priest, here with Matt Priest, Sandy Polk. I switched that up, didn't I?
He wishes he was Matt Priest.
Well, let me just go ahead and introduce myself today. Hi, guys.
Hello, Jasmine. There is an eternal burning question.
Yeah, what's
whether
that?
shoes influence culture,
Right?
or whether culture is reflected in shoes.
Yes. Chicken and the egg, I dare say.
It's a huge question.
Yeah.
We always talk about fashion and things like that, but
We
it's
do.
always a question of, is the fashion reflecting the culture, or is it influencing the culture? Maybe it's both. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I need some help.
You need some help. Well, we all need help, but
Maybe me more than other people thinking I'm Matt Priest.
That's right.
My dual personality is coming through again.
Oh, my gosh. But we do have help, Andy, on the fashion question, at least, not
Yes.
the other stuff. We have the author of Shoes, The Meaning of Style, Elizabeth Semmelhack, who is also the senior curator at the Bata Shoe Museum in Toronto, Canada. And Elizabeth is also the author of Out of the Box, The Rise of Sneaker Culture, which I said on a prior episode because this is her second time in the Shoe and
Welcome
Show
back.
Gauntlet. Sits on my coffee table in my office, as well as the author of Heights of Fashion, A History of the Elevated Shoe. Elizabeth, you're back for more torture. Welcome back to Shoe and Show. We are so glad that you're here.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, no, we really enjoyed our last conversation. We talked about the history of the museum, all the different really important aspects of what shoes tell us about culture, dating back 4, 5, 6, 10,000 years, and the way in which you and your fellow curator and the museum itself really kind of work really hard to capture that and to explain that to the broader public. And so we were so glad and pleased with that conversation. We wanted you to come back and have you talk about what's the genesis of the book and kind of what are you angling at and what did you discover?
Well, the genesis of the book was I was lucky enough to be approached by Reaction Press, the company, the publishers that published the book, and they had been working on a series of books called the Object Series, and they were looking at specific items, car, elevator, desk, whatever. And so they had just had Christopher Breward, who's a fashion historian, write the book Suit. And they asked if I would write the book Shoes. And I was excited. I said yes. And then I started to contemplate, what is the difference between suit and shoes? Well, suit is not clothes.
Right.
Shoes is shoes.
Right.
And I thought, I've agreed to write this book, but how am I actually going to write this book? Shoes, there is no shoe. There are only multiple different types of shoes. And so I realized that I couldn't tell the entire story, obviously.
Yeah.
That would probably be encyclopedic in length. And so I decided to organize the book looking at 4 different types of footwear. So sandals, boots, high heels, and sneakers. And the focus is not on telling the entire history of these types of footwear through all time, but it's really looking at more 19th and 20th and into 21st century history. And the other sort of challenge that I faced was that I was going to be repeating history, right?
Yeah.
I was going to have to tell the story of sandals through the same time as the story of boots, as the story of high heels, and the story of sneakers. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be redundant. And I think even though I work with footwear all the time, I'm a shoe historian, I was amazed by what a different lens these different types of footwear gave to that exact same time frame.
Right.
And so when you look at the history of sandals and you look at history through the history of sandals, you get a completely different story than if you do through, say, the history of sneakers. And so it was amazing for me, even though I was familiar with these types of shoes, to really sort of go through and try to suss out these individual histories. so I learned an incredible amount, I have to say.
And how much of the research had you already uncovered in writing your other books, or was this kind of everything was fresh, everything was kind of starting from scratch for you?
I started working on the history of the high heel when I first got hired. One of the things that I wanted to do is to figure out where the high heel had come from. It was a question that nobody had actually ever seriously asked before. And so that research of figuring out that it goes back at least as far as the 10th century in Persia, that it was developed for men, it was developed for horseback riding, used in military circumstances, allowed men to hold heavier weaponry and really transformed warfare. That work I had been doing, and so then I did the sneaker exhibition, the Rise of Sneaker Culture, or Out of the Box Rise of Sneaker Culture, where likewise I took, in doing that exhibition and writing the book, I went back to where did the sneaker even come from and sort of unraveled its origins. And so absolutely, that research finds its way into this book as well. I only have one brain. and so all of that work culminates in this book. But I had never done an exhibition or done specific research on sandals or boots specifically. And so it also allowed me to address issues or explore new territory. And so it was a lot of primary research. One of the things that's both a blessing and a challenge with doing footwear history is that there's very little actually written about it in a secondary resource kind of way. And so I plowed through endless, newspaper articles and boot and shoe recorder publications, and just going through as many period images and texts as I could find to construct this history.
Maybe let us know what you think are some of the highlights of the book. Maybe you've got like one or two in particular things that really just struck you and stood out and still stands out to you through your research that you could share.
I think that one of the questions that I approached the book with is, how is it that if you see somebody, maybe not so much today because Birkenstocks have become so high fashion, but 10 years ago, if you saw somebody in a pair of Birkenstocks, you might feel comfortable assuming that they had certain dietary habits or had certain political leanings. How could a single pair of shoes, sandals in this case, can conjure up such larger ideas about who those individuals were? And like I said before, why is it that high heels, which I've been able to establish, were developed for men, and one of the icons of masculinity, the cowboy, wears high heels, right, and yet we consider the high heel to be so fundamentally feminine and female. And so these concepts I wanted to explore in more depth. And what ended up happening is that I thought, I was a little worried that this would be a bit of a slog. But what turned out to happen, particularly for me with sandals, was there were some really pretty funny stories. The sandal in particular, like that, even the long-standing debate of socks and sandals, it goes all the way back to the 19th century.
In Germany, right?
Yeah.
Germany, definitely Germany.
Yeah. No, it's not Germany. It's England. With Edward Carpenter, who was part of this simple life movement, and he first imported sandals from India, and then he started making them himself. And there was this idea of this rejection of industrialization, and that sandals were healthier. And so many of the things that still have resonance in our footwear choices today actually start earlier. And so finding those earlier instances, including the idea of sneakers and criminality, where did the term sneaker come from? And, tracing that all the way back to rubber overshoes worn in women's prisons in the early part of the 19th century. And then I found this incredible article in a Chicago newspaper where they interviewed a criminal, a sandbagger, he was called. And they were like, so what is a sandbagger? And he's like, well, somebody who takes gunshot and he puts it in a bag and he sneaks up behind people, whacks them in the head and steals whatever they have on them. And he recommended that not only do you get like a pillowcase or bag to put this gunshot in, but you also wear a pair of sneakers because you can sneak up behind somebody. And so this is being promoted in the Chicago newspaper, and Boston ad roughly around the same time comes out, and it says, really, people, you can buy sneakers. You don't have to be a sneak to wear sneakers. And I thought that sounded just like Run DMC's line. Uh-huh. Almost 100 years later, right?
Oh my
I think we just
I wear my sneakers, but I'm not a sneak.
We found an IP violation in the music industry.
No, Reverend Run is an historian. That's what she's saying.
Yeah. And so it was like uncovering these little things that allowed me to make these links between, the facts we know today, the way we wear our footwear today, and how we came to see footwear the way we see it.
Well, let's dig a little, because you kind of passed through something, and you talk about it in the book, it's really important, but that high heels were developed for men? What? You should have seen Jasmine's face when you said that. Jasmine was like, huh?
Not my boyfriend.
So walk us through the history of the high heel.
So I still can't tell you who first invented the heel or exactly when it was invented. But I can tell you that it dates back at least as far as the 10th century in Persia in relation to the use of the stirrup. The stirrup seems to have been invented sometime in the 4th century, probably in Central Asia, and it started to move towards Europe. And the Persians used the stirrup quite early. And so they were also used, or at some point, I don't know if they invented it or again, it was invented someplace along the way, but we know that Persians were using heeled footwear to secure the foot into the stirrup, and that this was worn by military men, and it was worn to make horseback riding more effective and allowed for greater stability in the saddle so you could wield a heavier weapon. And so what I then wanted to understand is that, okay, if Persians are wearing the heel, at least in the 10th century, heel wearing actually sort of spreads. The Turkish the Turks start to wear it, Hungarians, the Poles, they all start to wear heeled footwear, but European men, or Western European men, had no interest in the heel at all until the turn of the 17th century. So then I had to figure out why. And it had to do with connecting, actually, it had to do with New World exploration, making it so that basically those who were sort of late getting into boats and finding the New World, the British and the Dutch, began to try to seek connections to East Indian trade by going overland. The British in particular go overland, bringing wool garments to bring to India. Of course, nobody in India wants wool fabric, and so they end up schlepping all that stuff back, bringing it through Persia, which was delightfully cold, and they begin to have they establish trading relations with Persia, and they had these high-heeled shoes. And so all of a sudden, at the turn of the 17th century, Persia's rising in interest in for Europe, and it has a military association, and it's my theory that this is why European men have heels added to their footwear at that time.
Wow.
And the reason why women started to wear high heels is because at that same time, there was a trend in women's fashion to, quote unquote, borrow from their boyfriend's closets, and that they were adopting many different aspects of male attire, including some women even carried weaponry, and they began to wear high-heeled footwear in the effort to look more manly.
Interesting. Man, the world's turned upside down.
High heels and sweatshirts.
What?
Flannel t-shirts.
Flannel t-shirts and sweatshirts. Women love stealing that from men still. So
for 130 years, men happily wore high heels. And it was not until Enlightenment thinking around the turn of the 18th century that heels, which are ridiculous off the horse, right? I mean, anyone who's been to a summer wedding in a pair of high heels knows this.
Right.
And so they start to be associated with new definitions of gender. Men were now considered to be rational creatures, and women were now considered to be irrational creatures, and the high heel off the horse.
That sounds like a male conspiracy.
And then the next thing you know, high heels become a signifier of femininity.
It's really interesting how this all plays out, because I feel like we're kind of going through something similar right now, and that is with the sneaker, right? So the CEO of 1950 or the 1970 or 1980s would have wingtip, would have dress shoes, be in a coat and tie, suit, the whole 9 yards. And nowadays, you run into CEOs or executives or white collar in a general sense that's sporting sneakers and jeans and blazers. And there could be a time when the sneaker will be the shoe for everything. Are we in the middle of one of these kind of transformations that you've researched on high heels and sandals and other types of shoes?
Yeah, I think that the sneaker itself, a lot sort of happens in the 1980s. And that's when we begin to have sort of this interest in technology, and that's when a lot of a new type of man sort of comes up who really begins to be in contrast to the traditional suited businessman.
Right.
And that's the computer genius, the tech wonder boy. And these tech geniuses tended to sort of bulk tradition, or let me put this a different way. Okay, these tech geniuses sort of show up at board meetings,
right,
where all the men are seated in their three-piece suits and their wingtips, and they're wearing playground attire, right?
Right.
And yet their lack of dress, their underdress, signals that they are actually the most powerful people in the room. And so there were things wrapped up in sneakers being related to youthfulness. Technology was sort of the new cutting edge future. And so this image of the young, successful businessman who doesn't wear a suit started to become an image of new masculinity. And it also becomes an image of masculinity that becomes increasingly more inclusive as we reach the end of the 20th century. And so this image of the white businessman in his business suit starts to become old-fashioned, and those who are really leading the charge for change tend to be sneaker clad. And so I think that it represents not only this interest in emerging technologies, but it also is a shift in who gets to be on top.
Yeah, and that shift is regional. So we're in Washington, D.C., which is still very traditional, very coat and tie.
Suit up?
Yeah, suit up or get out. Mm-hmm. I think of the financial industry, banking. But then you go to places like Portland, Boston, Seattle, Southern California, and there's not a tie in sight. And if you land at PDX in Portland, you're wearing a tie, you'll be mocked incessantly. So, it seems to be kind of regionalized, but it's
maybe it's because of the rise of technology, right? So we see an accumulation of wealth in a different sector, right? So in the past it was finance or industry, and now it's shifted to technology. So you got these Zuckerbergers, you might call them, that are wearing their hoodies and wearing sneakers around, and people see that and they're like, wow, these are successful people, and maybe want to mimic them in some way.
And I think, too, that we link sort of advances in technology with individual genius, right? And so one of the things that fashion does, and it's something that women have, for centuries have had to do, is that when a woman shows up anywhere, she has to make sure that she's not dressed like any other woman in the room, and that it's about expressing individuality through her choice of fashion. And men within the business world have tended to have more of a herd mentality, that you don't stand out, you blend in.
Right.
And so with technology and these ideas of breakthrough concepts, you have men starting to dress more individually. And so I see sneakers and sneaker culture in particular as being a way of allowing men to express some bit of individuality through their footwear choice, and that it is one, inculcating men into the fashion system, which is its own thing, but it's also allowing men to express individuality, which is increasingly prized as we're wanting to have those unique geniuses to guide our future through technology.
And that's playing out in what's available, when you can customize now, you can alter colorways, you can do all these things that make, even if it's a Cortez and there's a million people who have them, your Cortez looks a little different because of the colors that you chose.
Or you got a limited release.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But getting back to this idea of customization, the chapter that I end the book with actually looks at sort of the history of industrialization. And I end the book by asking whether or not we're going to think about, when we stand back and look at human history, the way that we always got our footwear, got our clothing, was in a very individual way, right? Before industrialization, you go to your shoemaker, you'd have some discussion with him. I want a pair of high heels. Okay, well, I can make it this high. I want an orange pair of shoes. Well, I've got yellow leather. And, you'd work together to basically come up with a pair of shoes that would be customer specific.
Right.
And then industrialization shifts all of that. You no longer go and get exactly what you want or compromise with your shoemaker. You now have to go and see what's available, what's in my size. But now sneakers are leading the way with allowing for the reintroduction of customization to the point of shoes being almost bespoke, and probably in some years in the future we'll have our own knitting machines and 3D printing machines. I'm wondering if industrialization, which forced us all to wear very similar footwear, is going to cease to exist, and we're going to go back to a kind of bespoke moment with sneakers, of all things, leading the way.
Yeah, it's like a return to our roots. That's unbelievable.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you'll have to do shoes part 2, the continued meaning of style.
Right. I know. I got to do loafers and
there's so many exact slippers. So this book, again, we're talking to Elizabeth Semmelhack, who's the author of Shoes, The Meaning of Style. It's got so much in it than we were just able to cover. One of the things, I'm a Beatles fan. One of the things I enjoyed was seeing the shoe, the Chelsea boot John Lennon had altered with the higher heel. There's so many cool nuggets of stories in the book that will really kind of broaden our listeners' understanding of the history of shoes and how style has driven the shoemaking process all the way from craftsmanship to industrialization and then maybe back to craftsmanship. So it's an unbelievable read. Thanks so much for writing the book. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so I think that does kind of answer some of my questions from the start, Matt.
Yeah.
Does shoe influence culture? Does culture influence shoe? And I think what we heard. Yes, exactly.
The answer is yes.
It's a deeper answer, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's very interesting to see how we as humans see ourselves shift.
Yeah.
And then as that shift happens, the shoes change and morph and as history ebbs and flows, is coming back full circle again and changing again, as was said about, the customization. I mean, I should say Matt even made a shoe with my face on it.
I did.
It was the worst pair of shoes I've ever seen in my entire life.
No one bought it.
No one. But you can put your face on your shoe and become,
Talk about the biggest narcissist on the planet.
But with that, I want to flip it over to Jasmine, who is going to do our world famous fashion, footwear, and focus segment.
What's up, Jasmine?
Hey, so I've been seeing some really interesting materials and really interesting things inspiring footwear design. And one is a designer named Christopher Kane. He also did a collaboration with Crocs in the past, and it was really popular. And he got his inspiration for his newest shoe design from his kitchen. So he has these white ankle boots that have fringe all around the ankle that look like a mop, and they almost touch the ground, but that's exactly what they look like. If you see them, the fringe are twisted and everything like your household mop. He also has used household sponges as a tongue for a boot, and has also used them as accent pieces. I also ran into a pair of plaid Vans covered in plaid not head to toe, but all around the shoe.
Right.
And I also seen a pair of sneakers with corduroy.
Corduroy?
Yeah, all over the upright. And I I see my mom's old pictures, and I know that's the kind of pants they wear, but I've never seen them in a sneaker before. And I don't know if this, everything repeats itself. So
Somebody went up into the grandpa's attic, grabbed his old jacket, and stitched her own shoes on.
That's what it looks like. But apparently that's getting popular, and I feel like it might even replace velvet, because you know how popular that was, and maybe corduroy is the step up. Not sure.
Oh my gosh. I mean, Elizabeth, are you rocking corduroy shoes right now?
Not yet.
Not yet. Can you imagine Elizabeth counterpart in like 500 years pouring through the Crocs and the corduroy uppers and the hyper adapts, trying to figure out what the meaning of style is in the 21st century? It's going to be really hard.
They're going to be all over the place.
All over the place.
Yeah, God help them.
Most people are probably just saying, do my shoes match my outfit? And Elizabeth's saying, what am I really saying about these shoes I'm wearing today?
Exactly.
It's a deeper thought. So.
If you're Elizabeth and you're putting your shoes on in the morning, you have a totally different internal conversation than I have. So.
I do. I'm not even wearing shoes now. Just give myself a break.
Well, Elizabeth, thanks again.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks again for joining. And Matt, the name of the book again is?
Yeah, it's Shoes, The Meaning of Style. You can order on Amazon and go to the Bata Shoe Museum in Toronto, where Elizabeth is the senior curator. You can pick up a copy there as well.
And I'll say this, we've got a copy, and we'll try to get a signed copy. If anybody out there who's listening is I would say this, the third email we get to info@fdra.org, we'll get a free signed copy. We'll have Elizabeth ship us down one, and we'll get you a copy. And that's the third email that we get from any listener out there. We'll provide that to you guys. And again, Elizabeth, thank you so much for your knowledge. And as most people know who have written books, it's a process, a laborious process of going down rabbit holes. You don't know where it's going to head. But this is a really great, interesting book that everybody who works in the industry should definitely read.
Thank you.
Yeah. And folks, as always, if you have ideas on shows we should have, topics, guests, whatever it is, please let us know. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. It's @ShoeInShow. And as always, thank you for listening. And until next time, from myself, Matt Priest, and Jasmine, Shoe-In is out.
Shoe-In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.